When we look back at the history of the automotive industry, we often celebrate the icons of grace, power, and aerodynamic perfection. We remember the sleek curves of Italian sports cars or the rugged, muscular stance of the classic American workhorses that define generations. However, behind the closed doors of design studios and engineering departments, there is a much darker, stranger side to this history. For every masterpiece that hit the showroom floor, there were dozens of sketches that should have been thrown straight into the shredder. Unfortunately, some of those sketches actually made it onto the assembly line. Today, we are diving deep into the world of the aesthetic outcasts. We are talking about the pickup trucks that didn't just miss the mark. They completely redefined what it means to be visually offensive. These are the vehicles that make you stop and tilt your head in genuine confusion, wondering how a team of professional designers, executives, and marketers all looked at a blueprint and collectively decided, yes, this is exactly what the public wants. In this video, we are focusing on the grotesque. We aren't just talking about a boring bumper or a dull paint job. We are exploring the world of bizarre proportions, mismatched body panels, face only a mother could love, front ends, and experimental shapes that failed spectacularly. From the experimental coupe utility hybrids that lost their way, to the shrunken compacts that looked more like kitchen appliances than road-going machines, these 20 vehicles represent the boldest risks that resulted in the most cringeworthy rewards. These are the trucks that remind us that different isn't always better. They are the mechanical embodiments of bad timing, budget cuts, and questionable taste. So, buckle up and prepare your eyes for a journey through automotive history's most awkward phase. These are the 20 grotesque old pickup trucks that should have stayed a sketch. The Subaru Brat. Kicking off our list is a vehicle that truly embodies the phrase identity crisis. The Subaru Brat, which stood for Bi-Drive Recreational All-Terrain Transporter, was a peculiar attempt to bypass the infamous chicken tax on light trucks imported to the United States. To classify it as a passenger vehicle instead of a cargo truck, Subaru bolted two rear-facing plastic seats directly into the open cargo bed. These seats came equipped with nothing but basic seat belts and two OSH*T handles, essentially inviting passengers to sit in the line of fire for wind, rain, and debris. Visually, it was a mess. It looked like a small, cramped economy car that had been violently sliced open at the back. The proportions were tiny, the styling was jagged, and those exposed seats made the whole setup look like a DIY project gone horribly wrong. The Mazda Rotary pickup, Ripu on paper, the world's only Wankel-powered pickup truck, sounds like a cool, eccentric piece of history. In reality, the Mazda Ripu was a visual anomaly. Produced in the mid-1970s, it took the already humble B-Series body and added flared fenders and a battery of round taillights that looked like they were stolen from a sports car and glued onto a utility vehicle. The front end featured a complex, busy grille that clashed with the simplistic, boxy nature of a work truck. Because the rotary engine required high RPMs to make power, it was fundamentally ill-suited for the low-end torque needs of a truck, and the exterior design reflected that confusion. It looked agitated and over-designed, with rotary power decals screaming for attention on a body that was essentially a boring rectangle. It was a mismatch of high-tech ambition and low-budget styling. The Dodge Deora. The Dodge Deora is a legendary concept, but that doesn't make it any less grotesque. Based on a 1967 Dodge A100, this vehicle looks like something from a low-budget sci-fi movie where the future is made entirely of fiberglass and regret. The most jarring feature is the complete absence of side doors. To enter the Deora, the entire front windshield swings upward, and the lower front panel swivels out, requiring the driver to climb over the dashboard just to reach the seat. From the side profile, it looks like a flattened loaf of bread with a giant glass bubble on the front. There is no traditional hood, no recognizable face, and the rear slants in a way that makes the proportions feel completely unbalanced. While it became a hit as a Hot Wheels toy, as a full-sized vehicle, it remains one of the most unsettling and impractical designs ever to touch pavement. The Chevrolet Love, the light utility vehicle, or Love, was a rebadged Isuzu that Chevrolet brought over to compete in the growing compact truck market. The problem was that it looked utterly malnourished. While American trucks of the era were known for their bold, wide stances and chrome-heavy grills, the Love looked like a fragile, shrunken caricature of a pickup. Its tiny wheels were tucked too far into the body, giving it a top-heavy appearance despite its small stature. The front fascia was incredibly bland, featuring a flat, uninspired grille and headlights that felt too close together. It had no muscularity, no style, and no presence. It felt like a placeholder for a real truck, a sketch that was rushed into production before anyone could add any character or substance to the design. The Studebaker Champ. Studebaker was a company struggling for survival when they designed the Champ, and it showed in the most painful way possible. To save money, they took the front end of the Studebaker Lark, a compact passenger car, and literally grafted it onto an old truck chassis. The result was a mechanical Frankenstein. The cab was narrow and rounded, featuring the delicate styling of a 1950s sedan, while the cargo bed was a wide, boxy, utilitarian slab of steel that didn't align with the cab's body lines at all. The step between the cab and the bed looked like a mistake, and the tiny car-like grille looked ridiculous trying to lead a heavy-duty load. It was a desperate attempt at car-like comfort that resulted in a vehicle with a permanent midlife crisis. The Ford Econoline pickup. In the early 1960s, Ford decided to take their Econoline van and chop off the rear roof to create a pickup. The result was a vehicle that looked fundamentally unstable. Because the engine was placed between the seats, the front wheels were pushed all the way to the corners, leaving a massive amount of body hanging over the front axle. This cab-over design gave it the profile of a flat-faced pug on wheels. It looked incredibly front-heavy, as if a sudden stop would send the entire truck somersaulting forward. The lack of a hood gave the driver a great view of the road, but it gave everyone else a view of a truck that lacked any sense of proportion or grace. It was a utilitarian box that forgot that aesthetics were part of the equation, looking more like a specialized airport tug than a vehicle meant for a driveway. The Volkswagen Type 2 pickup. The Volkswagen bus is a design icon, but its pickup sibling is a masterclass in awkward geometry. By cutting away the back of the famous splitty or bay window van, VW created a truck with a bed that sat unnaturally high to clear the rear engine. This resulted in massive, flat side panels that made the truck look like a floating dock on wheels. To make matters worse, the bed was often much wider than the cab, giving it a hips-too-wide appearance that felt completely disconnected from the front end. It featured weird treasure chest locker doors on the sides for storage under the bed, adding even more cluttered lines to an already confusing silhouette. It was a vehicle that tried to be a Swiss Army knife but ended up looking like a shed that had been forced onto a Beetle chassis. The International Harvester C-Series. International Harvester was known for making tractors, and with the C-Series pickup it really showed, and not in a good way. The C-Series, particularly the models from the early 60s, featured a massive, gaping grille that looked like a bottom-feeding fish gasping for air. The headlights were placed in enormous, bulging housings that sat too low on the fenders, giving the truck a perpetually sad and droopy expression. The cab was strangely bulbous, and the transition to the bed was harsh and unrefined. It looked incredibly heavy and industrial, lacking any of the cool factor that Ford or Chevy managed to inject into their work trucks. It was a brute force design that felt like it was sketched with a ruler and a heavy hand, ignoring every law of visual balance. The Jeep FC-150. The forward control Jeep is a favorite among off-road enthusiasts today, but from a purely aesthetic standpoint, it is undeniably bizarre. Built on a narrow CJ5 chassis, the FC-150 featured a massive, wide cab sitting directly over the front wheels. This created a top-heavy look that made the truck appear as if it was wearing a helmet 3 sizes too big. The vertical front face was dominated by a grille that looked like a radiator from a basement heater, flanked by bug-eyed headlights. Its wheelbase was so short and the cab so far forward that the proportions felt claustrophobic. While it was a mountain-climbing beast, it looked like a cartoon character that had been squeezed from both ends, a sketch that definitely prioritized function over any semblance of form. The Datsun 620. The Datsun 620 introduced what they called wing line styling, a strong character line that flowed from the front fender and dipped down at the door. While Datsun thought this was revolutionary, it actually made the truck look like it had been damaged or bent in the middle. This kink in the bodywork clashed horribly with the flat, horizontal lines of the bed. The front end featured a complex, sunken grille and quad headlights that felt far too busy for such a small vehicle. It was a truck trying to look aerodynamic and fast while standing still, but it only succeeded in looking cluttered. It was a collection of interesting ideas that, when put together, created a jagged and restless design that never quite felt cohesive. The Plymouth Arrow. In the late 1970s, Plymouth decided to jump into the compact truck market by rebadging the Mitsubishi Forte. The result was the Plymouth Arrow, a vehicle that suffered from a severe identity crisis. It featured a front fascia that was clearly designed for a subcompact passenger car, complete with slanted, aggressive headlights and a pointed nose, which was then abruptly welded to a flat-sided, utilitarian cargo bed. The Arrow decals and flashy 70s paint schemes couldn't hide the fact that the cabin was cramped and looked like it belonged on a hatchback. It had a strange, hunched-over posture, as if it were embarrassed to be a truck. The transition from the sloping, sporty hood to the vertical, boxy rear was so jarring that it looked like two different sketches were cut in half and taped together by mistake. The Suzuki Brute. The Suzuki Brute, the LJ20 series, was an early attempt at a micro-truck that took the concept of minimalism way too far. It looked less like a motor vehicle and more like a galvanized steel garden shed on lawnmower wheels. The front end was dominated by vertical slats that made it look like a radiator from an old farmhouse, and the headlights were tiny, unblinking eyes that gave the vehicle a vacant, unintelligent stare. Everything about the Brute was flat, thin, and sharp. There were no curves to speak of. It was a collection of harsh angles that felt unfinished. It was a vehicle that looked like it would fall over if hit by a strong gust of wind. A sketch of a truck that lacked the muscle required for the very name Brute. The late 70s Ford Ranchero. While the original Rancheros were sleek and stylish car-truck hybrids, by the late 1970s, the design had bloated into something truly grotesque. Based on the Ford LTD2, this version was an absolute behemoth. It featured a massive, protruding front nose with stacked rectangular headlights and a heavy, chrome-laden grille that looked like it belonged on a luxury funeral coach. The overhang in front of the wheels was enormous, making the truck look physically exhausted. The contrast between the heavy, formal luxury car front and the open utility bed in the back was comical. It was too long, too wide, and lacked any of the sportiness that made the original concept work. It was the automotive equivalent of wearing a tuxedo jacket with cargo shorts. The late 70s Chevrolet El Camino, not to be outdone by Ford's design failures, the late 70s El Camino also fell victim to the boxy is better philosophy. This era of the El Camino moved away from the graceful, integrated lines of the 60s and adopted a rigid, upright, and incredibly dull aesthetic. The front end was a flat wall of plastic and chrome, with a grille that had zero character. The rear quarter panels were long, flat slabs of sheet metal that lacked any contour or flared wool arches, making the vehicle look like a rectangular slab of soap. It had lost the muscle car DNA that made people love the SS models of the past, replaced by a design that felt like it was drawn using only a T-square and a pencil. The first-generation Toyota Hilux. Before the Hilux became the global symbol of indestructible toughness, it was a very strange-looking little machine. The first-generation N10 had proportions that felt off from every angle. The hood was unusually long and flat, while the cab was remarkably narrow and upright, giving it a pinched appearance. The most unsettling feature was the placement of the headlights. They were positioned high on the fenders, separated by a wide, thin grille that made the truck look perpetually surprised. The wheel arches were small and the tires looked like toothpicks holding up a bulky metal body. It lacked any sense of flow, appearing more like a prototype for a delivery vehicle that hadn't yet been refined for human eyes. The GMC Caballero. The Caballero was GMC's twin to the Chevrolet El Camino, and by the late 70s and early 80s, it had become a caricature of luxury utility. It suffered from the same bloated, boxy proportions as its cousin, but often with even more questionable trim packages. One specific trim, the Amarillo, featured two-tone paint jobs and wood-grain decals that looked like they were peeled off a cheap basement wall. The front end was a massive, upright block of chrome and plastic that felt completely disconnected from the low-slung, car-like rear. It was a vehicle that couldn't decide if it wanted to be a Cadillac or a construction site hauler, and in trying to be both, it ended up looking like a confusing mess of mismatched textures and outdated styling. The Dodge Rampage. In the early 1980s, Dodge decided to take a front-wheel drive subcompact car, the Charger, and turn it into a pick-ape. The result was the Rampage, a vehicle that looked like a sports car that had been stretched on a rack until it snapped. Because it was based on a small car chassis, it had a very low nose and a wedge-like shape that ended abruptly in a tiny, shallow bed. The plastic cladding and the 80s-style aero bumpers made it look cheap and fragile. It had no ground clearance and zero visual muscle. It looked like a motorized doorstop. The proportions were so awkward that it seemed as though the front half and the back half were from two different scales of model kits. The Subaru Baja. While technically a spiritual successor to the Brat, the Subaru Baja is a modern lesson in design clutter. It took the Outback wagon and sliced off the cargo area to create a bed that was almost uselessly small. To make it look rugged, Subaru covered the lower half of the vehicle in massive amounts of gray plastic cladding that clashed with every paint color available. It had silver roof rails, a silver bed bar, and a nose that was far too soft and rounded for a truck. It looked like a sedan wearing a backpack it didn't want. The visual weight was all over the place, making it one of the most polarizing and aesthetically confused vehicles to ever leave a Japanese design studio. The Powell Sport Wagon. The Powell Sport Wagon is a bizarre relic from the 1950s that looks like it was built in a garage using leftover home siding. Built on repurposed 1941 Studebaker chassis, the Powell featured a body made of flat, uncurved steel panels. It had no styling lines to speak of, just flat surfaces and sharp, right-angled corners. The front grille was a simple, industrial mesh, and the headlights looked like they were bolted on as an afterthought. Its most innovative feature was a slide-out tube in the rear bumper for carrying fishing poles or pipes, which only added to its eccentric, DIY appearance. It looked less like a professional automotive design and more like a prop from a post-apocalyptic movie set. The Crosley Pup. The Crosley Pup takes the award for being the most untruck-like truck ever built. Produced in the late 1940s, this was a subcompact pick-ape that was so small it looked like it belonged on a carnival ride. It had tiny, narrow tires and a body that was essentially a metal bathtub with a seat. The hood was a simple, rounded hump, and the headlights were bug-eyed lamps sitting on top of the fenders. It lacked doors, a roof, or any sense of safety. It looked incredibly fragile and comical, as if a single heavy load would cause the entire vehicle to fold in half. It was a sketch of a truck, made by someone who had only ever seen a photo of one from a great distance. As we bring this journey through the Hall of Shame to a close, it is impossible not to feel a strange mix of second-hand embarrassment and genuine fascination. These 20 vehicles stand as permanent reminders that the automotive industry is not always about wind tunnels, golden ratios, and timeless elegance. Sometimes it is about corporate desperation, failed experiments, and designers who perhaps spent a little too much time staring at abstract art and not enough time looking at how a truck actually functions in the real world. Looking back at these grotesque machines, we see a recurring theme, the danger of the hybrid concept. Whether it was the car-truck crossovers like the bloated late 70s Ranchero or the van-truck monstrosities like the Econoline, the attempt to be everything to everyone often resulted in being nothing to anyone, at least from an aesthetic standpoint. These sketches were brought to life by committees that prioritized utility over beauty, or by companies trying to survive financial ruins by grafting old car faces onto rugged truck bodies, like the unfortunate Studebaker Champ. But there is a lesson here. Even in their ugliness, these trucks represent a time when manufacturers weren't afraid to take massive risks. In today's world of sanitized, computer-generated designs where every crossover looks exactly like its competitor, there is something almost refreshing about a vehicle as unapologetically weird as a Dodge Deora or a Subaru Brat. They might be eyesores, they might be sketches that should have been burned, but they have character that a modern wind tunnel-tested SUV simply cannot replicate. They are the mechanical outliers, the design what-ifs that somehow slipped through the cracks of quality control and ended up in the driveways of unsuspecting buyers. They remind us that the road to innovation is paved with bad ideas, and for every Ford F-150 that changes the world, there's a Crosley pup or a Dodge Rampage lurking in the shadows of history, waiting to remind us of what happens when the drawing board goes horribly wrong. Thank you for joining us on this exploration of the bizarre and the misshapen. If you have a soft spot for one of these automotive accidents, or if you think we missed a truck even more hideous than these 20, let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to hit that like button if you enjoyed this look at the weirder side of car culture, and subscribe for more deep dives into the best and worst of automotive history. Until next time, keep your eyes on the road and your sketches in the bin.